One thing that I think is really fascinating that came out of the last couple of years is we've had such unprecedented events and things happen where I've been in board meetings and in conversations with other organizations where I have an idea and I raise my hand and everyone's paying attention, where everyone's voice in the room carries the same amount of weight because no one has a set of experiences that could set them up with a better frame of mind or reference point than anybody else in the room. We were all navigating the same set of challenges with zero experience.
Welcome to Season 11, Episode 1 of the Backcountry Podcast. I'm Adam Howard. If you've been in a mountain town in the past decade, you've seen the proliferation of Skida hats and neckies. They're part and parcel now to global ski culture. But what about the founder of Skida? That's 31-year-old Corinne Prevot. What began for Corrine as a means of self-expression in high school has blossomed into a business with 25 employees, mostly under the age of 30 and mostly all women. Based in Burlington, Vermont, Skida hats and neckwear are renowned for their eclectic patterns and athletic designs. Patterns like plaid, pastel, and fields of flowers reflect Corinne's passion for art and nature. She's also got a serious passion for ripping big faces in the backcountry, Nordic skiing, and recently winning a couple amateur Enduro World Cup events on her mountain bike. I first got to know Corinne when she jumped on my 24-hour mountain bike racing team after a last-minute scratch. In short, she's got game. In this episode, Corinne reflects on the loss of friends and family and how she can only hope to match their passion and drive in her own life and work. And we talk about legacy and how it feels to be breaking trail for the next generation of young women. We'd like to thank Minus 33 for sponsoring this episode and supporting independent media.
This episode is brought to you by Minus 33. Stay out on the slopes longer with Minus 33 merino wool base layers. For high-quality base layers, tops, gloves, socks, and more, go to minus33.com and use code Backcountry23 at checkout to get 15% off your order.
All right, friends, let's get into it. Corinne Prevot, welcome to the Backcountry Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Howie.
As a fellow Vermonter, I've watched your company grow from, the first hat I would see at a ski race somewhere to where it is today, which is, I would be surprised if there were any in the audience listening today that hadn't seen a Skida hat somewhere in some ski town, certainly in North America, but also elsewhere. And, I know you started this when you were 16 at Burke Mountain Academy. And I got to ask, why hats? Why hats? Why not something else? And why anything at all, for that matter?
Why anything? I actually started knitting. Those were my first hats, but they didn't really catch on. And when I started cross-country skiing, I was pretty new to the sport, and I was in high school, and I was really struggling to find a hat where I felt like I was kind of expressing myself. And I actually had made some fleece hats, but they were too hot for Nordic.
Yeah.
So I picked up some poly lycra fabric at the local craft store in Lyndonville and had seen like under helmet hats and kind of seen that material used. And I love the bright colors and four-way stretch fabrics. I think they were used for bathing suits or something, which is a little awkward. But I made some hats for my teammates. And we wore them to this race, and it kind of felt like our own little beacon of team spirit, and we were having a lot of fun. And I mean, from there, we really made a splash. We got a lot of attention and started making more hats for my friends and other teams and their parents, and that's the start.
I think a lot of folks that aren't from the racing world, whether it's Nordic or Alpine, probably don't necessarily understand the power of the closeness of those communities and how starting something like this, you can see how it can catch fire really quick if it's cool. And from, I think the thing that has been so impressive to me, because as a person in that community or communities as it is, to see it catch fire beyond that is really cool. So would you call Skida like product of that culture of ski racing, of that community?
Definitely. I feel so much gratitude towards growing up in that community and being fortunate enough to have the support system. And Vermont is unlike any other. You go to the Killington World Cup, there's 20,000 people there. That's New England skiing. And I went to the Beaver Creek World Cup. I loved it. It was my first time there. But there is a fraction of people there compared to who shows up in Vermont. And of course, that's the proximity to cities and population density. But I think there's something to be said for the community here. And I mean, with hats too, I feel like it is such a self-expression thing, and it's on your face, you know, it's like it's connected to how you present yourself. And I think there's a lot of fun. You remember Bula in the early ski racing world, what was in the 80s? You know, similar brand brought up and really kind of caught fire in the ski racing world. So I think it's kind of natural, like you said, for things to catch on. I owe so much to the Burke community for really being the kind of founding ground for it. And then the ski racing and winter sports world of New England as a whole to really help embrace and celebrate it.
Yeah. And as you know, like, we New Englanders tend to not be afraid to get on planes to find more fertile grounds, as it were, and bring our hats with us.
It's pretty cool how Vermont skiers go everywhere. That's another topic, but I like that aspect of being a Vermont skier.
Well, we'll get back to that later, because I want to talk about your travel and some of how you've used Skida to travel the world, really. But let's first go back to when I asked you why hats. I almost sensed that in your mind you were thinking, well, it had to be something. And I got to thinking, like, this is a businesswoman. She was born a businesswoman, and that's just who she is. She's hard. And I think this is why you and I can relate so well, is because I just feel accurate, and not that I get you, because you love business. And I'm guessing you loved it from an early age. Is that the case?
I feel like I learned about business late in the game, but if we're talking about busyness, that's definitely been kind of a product of my upbringing. And I think the way I've been raised is just always doing things and always having something to work on. And in that aspect, I feel like I'm like you in that way. But I think in terms of like the formality of business, it almost like repulses me in a way, because I think there's a lot of negative connotation around just how big businesses can get and how much power they can have. And I think on a personal level, I feel more like a busy person. I like to be busy. I like to do things. And that's where I think I got it.
That's really well put. It's well put, because you don't learn the kind of business nitty gritty, and it's not like you aspire to that. You learn that, unfortunately. If that were the lesson that you learned first, you'd be like, I never want to be anywhere involved in business, right? Like, that's the tough stuff, right?
I definitely didn't set out to make a business. And that's where I appreciate the way you asked that, because the way you pronounced business made me think of busyness. And I can't unsee that now.
How's busyness these days, Corinne? So let's go back again. At whatever age, 16, 18, I mean, you did this all through college. Like, some of us sold drugs in college. You were selling hats, and that's pretty, like, we stayed busy, but like we were doing something else. Here you were, like, at Burke and then at college, and I know you had some help, I believe, like from your family, like helping with the business while you were going to school and stuff. Take us through that. Like, what did that look like? Because you didn't really take a break.
Every year was different, right? And so because of our seasonality with hats, you really only need them in the winter. I feel like the business has had a really natural cadence in the early years, where that first winter when I was making the first hats, we were just kind of riding this wave. We were in it weekend after weekend, going to the next ski race. I had a shoebox with hats in it. And over the summer, it was kind of like, whoa, what was that? That was crazy. And I've thought about, okay, maybe I could buy some fabric and start making these earlier. And someone came to me and was like, you should put a label on these. Like, I don't think I even had a name for it until like the first, I don't know, few dozen hats were made and sold. And so that, I think, set a cadence for the rest of the subsequent 14 years of every summer being this joke of, oh, we'll work on that over the summer. That's our summer project. And so every summer you'd kind of get to the busyness, and then the winter comes and you're out and about, and we're making it happen, and we're seeing our new prints on new people and taking them to new places. And every year that just got kind of bigger and bigger. But there was definitely a shift, I think, after college, because even when I was applying to college, I remember it's like, Mom, look at this website I made. And she was like, you need to be doing your Common App. And that was like it was this form of procrastination for me, where even through school, when I was checking out of my schoolwork, I was kind of diddling over on creating a Facebook page or uploading photos to a blog. And they were looking for more fabric on eBay. And there was always something to do or chip away at in those early years. And it wasn't until I was ready to graduate and I really felt like, okay, there's a lot I could do if I just dedicated all of my time to this, because I really wasn't able to. I felt like I was always playing catch up. And I still feel like I could do better with proactive planning. I feel like there's so much reaction to, oh my gosh, look at this print. And that's well received. Like, what do we learn from that? Yeah, every year, every cycle, every season just brought this kind of new learning and new way of thinking year after year. So it's felt like these building blocks.
In your early days, we'd run into each other here and there, and I'd see the hats around. Obviously, I have a lot of women in my life, and they're always wearing your hats. And I wondered, what was going to be next, and where does a hat business go? And it's been interesting watching where you've taken it, because, like, how do you keep it fresh? How do you keep new things going all the time? And you've recently started with all these collabs, which are super, super cool. Tell us about how that started and where that came from. And give us some examples too.
The collab piece is super fun for me from a design perspective, because in a nutshell, it allows me to take our Skida sensibility and merge it with somebody else's personality or a different brand or an organization or a message or another athlete. And they get to put their spin on our style, and we come together to create something like that. I should say there's a distinction too, where the first kind of design that I made for somebody else was the Alaska Pacific University ski team in Anchorage, Alaska. And that was my first summer project. And we made them for the Nordic team. And it was this pink floral print. And I made 60 hats. And that was like my summer gig. And it took me a long time to make those. But that was a print that they picked and from an array of fabrics that I had in stock. And then we made it for them. And that was in 2009, maybe 2008, 2009, something like that. Regardless, we moved on. I remember this summer after I graduated from high school, so maybe the year later, the organization called She Jumps reached out, and I did my first kind of custom print for them. And it was a polka dotted print, and it had these kind of diagonal stripes of polka dots in different colors. And we did a label for She Jumps. And I worked with Carla Hunter at the time, who was working for She Jumps on the design. I think she was getting sign off from Lindsay Dyer. And, we worked on this print, some iterations of it, and then got to the colors and style that we liked. And then we ran it. And I feel like that model of, I owe it to Carla for connecting the dots between this small Vermont hat company and the She Jumps organization that was all about getting women out on snow and girls. and really seeing the connection there. And it's really up to someone to see the connection to bring that collaboration together. So it's like that human element to it, I think, is so important, and really the way that our collaborations unfold. Most recently, we've worked with brands from Pit Viper to Wild Rye to Vermont Glove, putting our spin on their product. We have some exciting ones coming out next year. But the breadth of organizations and brands, I feel like, boil down to a shared mission. With Pit Viper, it was all about self-expression and fun. And with Wild Rye, it's celebrating technical women apparel for women getting out on bikes and skis. What I've learned over the years is that there's these kind of common messages that we can align on, and then come to a design that celebrates or embodies that, and then kind of connect the dots for people of, hey, we're homies with the women at Coalition Snow, and check out what they're up to because we back it.
Tell us about some of the swatches, the fabrics that you get, and where do they come from, and how, like, are you designing the actual, you talked about those polka dots and all in a line, whatever. Tell us the genesis story of start to finish with a hat.
The genesis story. Well, in the first year, I was just buying like dead stock fabric, which is ends, rolls, yardage of fabric that's left over from production from somebody else. And it goes to, in the mid 2000s, it went to a variety of fabric warehouses. And so I'd be shopping from these fabric warehouses, whether they were online or I physically went to New York City to the fashion district and walked through these shops and pulled back the fabric on these rolls to see if we liked the print or not, and if the hand feel was similar to what we've been using. And so those early days, I was just shopping and kind of curating designs based on what I was finding in the market. And one of my favorite prints from those days is this strawberry scratch and sniff pattern. And no joke, I made a neck warmer out of it. And I remember riding the Pama at BMA on Burke Mountain, and I'm wearing my strawberry neck warmer, and it's just, I can sniff it. It smells like strawberries the whole day. And that, I can't buy that fabric anywhere. Like, it doesn't exist. So call out if anyone knows of scratch and sniff fabric that's prepared for print, let me know. But that day, or that era of kind of shopping around, was so fun and exciting. And I have some of my original prints like pinned on I have this board here. That red floral was one of the first prints that I bought. And it was always exciting because I'd see this little swatch on the internet, and then it would arrive and the scale of the print would be completely different, or it would be huge. And so you'd put the hat on, it'd be like one flower and the petal would be sweeping across your head. Or one would arrive and the flowers will all be really small. But it was always such a gamble. Like, I never knew what was going to show up. So there was a lot of kind of mystery to it in those days, and excitement. And when those fabrics sold out, like, they were sold out. We couldn't go back and get more because it was dead stock. So that, I think, was kind of the early stages of limited edition and, buying and making fabric based on what I liked, and then seeing how it sold and learning something from it. And then in 2013, it was really when I graduated from college that I decided I wanted to do more kind of custom designed artwork. And I was learning graphic design through some cartography classes at Middlebury. So I learned map making, and that taught me how to use the Adobe programs. And so I was really excited about learning how to make repeats and graphic designs using those tools, which had a lot of similarity to what artwork files you need to create for fabric printing. And so I started building some of my own designs and sourcing art from designers. And that's kind of been the genesis for how we operate now. And I'm still curating, but we're sourcing all of our prints as original art. So we have our designs are owned by Skida. We typically license them from artists, or we create them in-house. This was a lemon that I painted for Paula Moltzen in her second athlete collaboration. And I took watercolors and and painted kind of a few different lemon and leaf motifs, and then scan them in and bring them into the computer and do a tile so that it's kind of infinitely repeating. And that process is super fun and elaborate. And now we're doing it. We have an in-house design team, and we work with a fabric printer in California. And that's been a process that we're continually refining.
So I'm assuming most of your fabric is sourced in Asia. Is that true, or?
Yeah, the raw materials are imported from Hong Kong and Taiwan, and they are coming in through a distributor in California. And they're using recycled, like percentages of the fabrics use recycled materials. One of our base fabrics we've been using for 12 years. And I think that's been a really positive relationship, is working with a vendor. And we actually just visited them a couple months ago, and they are rolling out all these huge kind of trade certification, new credibilities for their fabrics. And it's 5:30 on Thursday, so I'm sorry, my language, I'm not super articulate about that right now, but they're getting with the times, and now you can't source anything from them that's not using virgin materials unless you're doing something proprietary. But all their stock materials have recycled content, and that has been really cool to see the progression in poly-based fabrics to move into kind of the norm and the standard being recycled, post-consumer recycled.
So the fabric gets here to Vermont, and I think one of the big parts of your story is you've used, what do you call them, sewsters?
Just seamstresses or sewists.
Sewist? I want to say I read a word on your website that made it sound like it was like a riffing off sister, but maybe I'm totally off base.
Seamstress?
No,
Well, maybe
it was
that's a
something else.
typo.
No. It was like sewster. And I was like, well, that's an interesting way of calling, At any rate, you're using home sewers, or have. What's the status of that? How did that start? I mean, I'm assuming it started when you were up in the kingdom and
Yeah.
still at Burke.
Yeah, it really did. And I love speaking about it because I feel like this is where some of my quote business advice is really about, like, starting locally and starting with talking to your neighbors and talking to your community about what you're interested in doing, what you want to do, what you're looking for, what resources do you need. And it started because I remember the maintenance guy at Burke at the academy. He really loved this hat that we made him, and it was dragon print. It was really groovy. And his wife was a seamstress, and we got connected with her to create or start sewing some of our products for us. And then she connected us with another gal who had run a factory floor up in Newport, Vermont. There's a ton of manufacturing, textile manufacturing that was going on in Newport. 80s, 90s, Bogner was produced up there. And
Right.
I think that's such a cool part of Vermont history and Vermont's kind of manufacturing history that we don't necessarily see too much evidence of. I think there's a lot of really cool resurgences happening in Burlington that I'm really excited about and pretty passionate about partnering with. But I think one of the beautiful things about the Newport landscape was a lot of when the factories closed and started going overseas, a lot of sewists, really skilled workers, were kind of spinning off their own garment operations, whether that was doing hem work or kind of their own one-off jackets and different kind of sewing operations. And we came to a family that we've been working with for 12 years now, and they run a contracting business, and they do stitch work for a number of brands and uses. And it's been really cool to see that relationship last long term. And just the sheer fact that our product is made in Northern Vermont just blows my mind still, that we've been able to make it work. And in today's day, it just feels like such a blessing and fortunate thing that we get to be in Vermont, make our product here, and live here and design here and like take inspiration from our landscape. Like, I don't know. I feel like that's really special right now.
It is special. And you've also, by virtue of being in Vermont, you talked about Paula Moltzen. Your neck warmer was at the Olympics, for instance. You've got Ryan Cochran-Siegel, you got Leah Davison. You kind of came of age at this time where we have some like elite level pro athletes in the sports we love wearing your stuff. And that's got to just thrill you. I mean, that's just really cool. In addition to all the other amazing athletes from elsewhere that you work with.
No, it's so rad. I remember ski racing, like J4, J5, age range. I was between the ages of Ryan Cochran-Siegel and his sister Caitlin, and got to see them at Beaver Creek this weekend and see Barbara Ann. And it's just like, I don't know, it's familiar faces. And now we're seeing Ryan compete and land in top 10s and World Cups and medal in the Olympics. It's so surreal. And it's all like stemming from the Cochrane ski area. It's stemming from UVM. All these athletes.
The Cochrane diaspora
Middlebury
is large.
It's amazing. It's inspiring.
Yeah, it's super cool. So in addition to your Vermontness and taking inspiration from this place, working with locals all along the food chain of Skida, you've used your busyness, your business to see the world. And, it's been fun following your exploits because, whether it's a marketing shoot in Iceland, like a catalog shoot, or I don't know, you've been all over the place. And obviously you're a great athlete yourself.
Thank you.
You ski for Forefront, for heaven's sake. I mean, you're like a pro athlete and you own a company. Did you think about like, I want this company to take me places in the world? When did that come into your mind? Like, oh, I could actually do this, or was it always there?
I've been thinking about this a lot recently because I had experienced a lot of loss this summer, and I was struck by the loss of Mariah Wilson at the beginning of the summer in May. And she's from my hometown of East Burke and was an amazing cyclist, kind of on the brink of this amazing point in her career. And I feel so fortunate to have gotten to spend time with her doing a photo shoot in California right after Sea Otter. And that shoot was an example of what you talked about, of like combining my passions and places I want to visit and experience, things I want to experience with people that I want to surround myself by. And it was amazing to reconnect with Mariah. I hadn't seen her for about 8 years. And her death this summer was really jarring, mostly because I felt this like innate just admiration for how she was living her life. And that was so remarkable. I remember coming home from that trip and just being so rejuvenated. And it's people like that pursue this life in their sport. And right after we had spent time together in California, she put in her notice to specialize, to take her cycling full time. And just to witness someone like take this plunge into sport and take this commitment was so inspiring and really powerful. And I like many and her family, of course, have been grieving from her loss. And the second interface I had this summer was my cousin, who was also 26 years old, and she is an aspiring mountain guide and was climbing and leading a client in August on the Mont Blanc Massif, and in an accident, they fell to their death. And she was a week from becoming the youngest mountain guide in the world at age 25. And that, again, felt like a really powerful and jarring loss of a young person, a young woman who has been really who I've taken a lot of impression of, again, like pursuing this life in sport and in passion and so happy and so driven and such a positive influence. And Adele, my cousin's mother, who is my aunt, her name is Ilse. She too was a mountain guide and also lost her life in the mountains when I was about 13. And she had moved to France as a teenager, went to college in Lyon, and started her guiding company out of Teen Val d'Isère after becoming a ski instructor and pursuing ski racing. And Ilse's life, and we got to visit her when I was young. I was probably 9, and one of my most impressionable visits where we could actually go out and go skiing. And she took us to the huts and took us ski touring with these 1990s era, like chunky ski bindings, and just kind of showed us around her zone. And, we got to see the office of the guiding company. We got to see just this kind of glimpse of such a foreign and unique lifestyle that was centered around skiing and guiding and giving people experiences, sharing these experiences in the mountains. And I haven't really thought about it until this year where I've really been processing a lot of this. And I feel so fortunate to have had that exposure to someone like Ilse as my aunt, like pursuing this life that was so unusual and adventurous and driven by passion and that vigor and zest for life to be in the mountains. Like I think I took that for granted for many years. And in the processing I've had with the loss of Adele and even Mariah, like just the significance of having people around you in your sphere that have chosen that direction is so undeniably powerful for yourself as an individual. And like taking inspiration from that has been such a gift.
Well, that's really well said. And I'm sorry for your losses.
Thank you.
I know the whole state, the whole athletic state, if you will, of Vermont was really torn up over Mariah. I will say though, as someone who's built a career around following people who are inspiring, like in all of these mediums, mountain biking, cross-country skiing, alpine skiing, backcountry skiing, obviously, climbing, it's inevitable, right, that we have these losses. And that's hard to take. That's hard to even to know that it's inevitable. I guess that's life. It's no different day to day than it is in the mountains, I suppose. How is that informed, like where you are right now and where you plan to be in the coming months, years? And I'm not talking about business. I'm talking about like use your business to get where you want to go. I mean, that's one of the things you've done really well that I love. Does it make you want to double down? Does it make you want to do even more?
Yeah, it's really lit my fire of like what am I passionate about and what's important to me. And I absolutely love being in the mountains, and I love skiing, and I love mountain biking, and I love sharing those things with my friends and with new people, and like seeing people's joy of learning and progressing in their own sport or a new sport is so powerful and really what drives me. And I learned of Adele's passing in August, and I was at a mountain bike race. I was between the 2 EWS races that were hosted in New England this year, and I was racing at Burke and at Sugarloaf.
Which I'm sorry, but you won both of them. Just for the record,
I won the amateur category.
Well,
let's make that clear.
Stop it.
No, that was such a fun event, and I had women, my 2 friends at each race that I got to ride with, and I think that was such a key in having a good experience. But I learned of Adele right after Burke finished, and I was processing it through the week, and then I remember showing up to Sugarbush just feeling like really kind of emotionally like strong and like I was kind of buzzed. And the way I thought about it, and I remember talking to my good friend Caitlin Mitchell while I was sitting in a stream after one of the race days and just icing my legs in a stream and kind of debriefing with her. And we talked about the risk of being in the mountains and like how you kind of deconstruct something like that happening. And we kind of boiled it down to just the power of just applying that zest to your own life. And like you can take that zest and that energy and that pursuance and drive, and you can kind of adjust it to whatever your passions are or whatever level you want it to be at. And I think that's been a really nice way of reframing it for myself. But ultimately, I left a week after, I left the Tuesday after Sugarloaf for a trip to Australia where I was photographing a bunch of our fall campaign work. And I thought about having two angels on my shoulders. And I was thinking about Adele and I was thinking about Mariah. And I felt like I had boundless energy during that 10-day period. And I was just thinking about them and their passion for skiing. I felt like I was waking up with energy and drive. And I remember one day we slogged like 80 pounds on our backs up to this hut. And it was like a breeze. And I just thought about Adele. I thought about Mariah. I thought about why I love to be there. And it was a very sobering couple of weeks.
So you're in Australia for a shoot and you're going, to a hut or something up on the mountains?
Yeah. So part of the shoot, we went up to this backcountry hut in Australia and the Victorian Alps, and the weather was crummy, so we had to hike up from the valley, and it was a 5-hour hike with about 80-pound packs for winter camping and skiing and shooting. And I just felt like the hike was almost effortless. Like I had these angels on my shoulders, this invigoration of energy. And I thought a lot about on that hike, just that I was truly in that moment, like doing what makes me happy. And the fact that I was hiking up to this mountain in a new place with friends new and old, building relationships, about to go ski a new mountain and really pushing myself. Like those elements were all things that really make me feel whole. And I thought about those girls and how they, in their short lives and their young lives, had figured it out, like they're 26 and they had already accomplished so much. And I just think that that's no accident. There's something really powerful about that. And I feel grateful to have known them and take that inspiration and think about them. And every time I'm outside and pushing myself.
What is it about coming from a family, that loves being outdoors and loves the mountains, that gives, folks like yourself and Mariah and your cousin those wings? I think we forget how important it is, as someone who does a lot of work to get young people out in the world here in our community. A lot of people think, oh, it's just skiing. It's just hiking. It's way more than that. What is it?
I was just listening to a video on social media, and it was a Black man talking about the barriers of skiing. And I read it briefly. I was traveling. I was on an airplane last week, and I watched it. And I don't remember his name, but his daughter is a mogul skier. And he talked about the barriers to sport. One, of course, being financial, and the other being legacy. And if your parents aren't taking you out and teaching you to ski, the barrier as an adult or a young adult to get into the sport is a lot harder. And it made me feel like, or just even more recognizing of my own privilege of my family and parents taking me out skiing. And that as a young person, having, whether it's a family member or a mentor or a classmate or a program in your local neighborhood to take you out to the mountain, the barrier and opportunity that you might have to get there is much far and few between. It's really diminished. If you have that access and that legacy of generational passion for skiing enough to teach your kids, like that's the leg up. And I realize how special that is. But I think it's legacy.
And in that experience, being in the mountains, I've always thought about it in pretty simple terms. That's all I'm capable of. But it's something about just this freedom, right? And you're responsible, whatever your gender, whatever your ethnicity, you're responsible for yourself as you move through space at speed. And there's something about being able to take that and apply it to life that is, I think, lost on a lot of people that haven't ever done it.
Yeah, I think that sheer kind of challenging your body. I'm pretty small, and I really like how skiing and biking, for example, is an opportunity for me to kind of make myself bigger and like challenge my own brute strength of how I can ski something with grace or with aggression or with speed. I don't have much style, but I'm working on that. And I feel like that's the challenge, is like kind of leveraging your strength to be bigger than you are. And I actually had this realization the other day because it's just the winter's back, right? And we're skiing again. And
I don't know.
okay, well, I went to Sugar Bush opening day and it was really, really fun, but so silly. It was 1.5 trails. And regardless, the idea of skiing, and after a season of mountain biking, you go from single track where you're pursuing one track, and then you get on skis and you have the whole trail and you get to pick your line. You get to choose exactly where you go and what you want to ski and what terrain and what jump you want to avoid or hit or whatever, and who you're making turns with, who you're trying not to hit. Like, I just think that is so different than a sport like biking. And that was kind of a fun aha moment, but I don't want to talk about the state of winter here, Howie.
Yeah, no, nor do I. I love your point though, because I've often wondered, I bike a lot, right? And just for our audience, one of my great privileges years ago was doing a 24-hour race with you totally by accident.
Oh yeah, we did that. That was crazy.
we did do that. We lost our girl on a co-ed team like on a Thursday, and somebody says, "Oh, you should call Corrinne." And you're like, "Sure, I'll go." It was so cool. And I think that speaks a lot about who you are. Like that you'd go race with a bunch of dudes who you did not know, essentially. And,
twice my age.
No.
No.
Come on. Maybe half again. I was going somewhere and I forgot. Oh, you know what it was? I've often wondered, like, why do I love skiing so much and love cycling in all its forms not as much? I mean, I love it, but just it's not the same. I got one true love, and that's skiing. And that's all I got. I mean, really, at the end of the day. Are you more of a skier than a cyclist? Because you're a hell of a bike rider, too.
Thank you for saying that. I feel like my bike season, I even slipped in skiing there. My bike season is really long, arguably longer than winter.
Sure.
And I feel like every time I get back on skis, it's more special because it feels like the winters are getting harder and it feels more novel. It feels like that kind of self-expression, like I was saying, with the open trail, and you can kind of pick wherever you want to go. And that's pretty unmatched for me. Not to mention a powder day. That's the pinnacle and the holy grail. But I think I'm a skier. That's kind of how I identify. And I really love mountain biking. I love the complexity of the equipment. I love the community. I love that you can do it anywhere and you can find communities anywhere and there's bikes involved. And it's truly a global language. But I don't know. I'm kind of attached to the novel season. Like, all these things have to align to go skiing.
Do you ride bikes in the winter?
Not on snow.
Yeah. I like to hang it up.
I like Nordic skiing. If it's good fat biking, it's probably good Nordic skiing.
True that. Yeah. So you talked about your aunt and her really unique path, especially for her generation. I mean, leave the States, go over and be a mountain guide in Europe, and and all of that. And it sounds like, her daughter was following in her footsteps. You talked about Mariah. I know your mom's been a big force in your life. Do you think with any intention yet? I mean, you're only 30, like, and you don't have children. Do you think about paying it forward to that next generation yet? Is that in your mind at all? Or is that something that only older people like myself think about, the legacy part of it?
Well, thank you. I'm flattered that anyone would kind of take interest and inspiration. I feel like I'm a sponge to find kind of inspiration in people around me or people that have preceded me. And I think this year has been really heavy in a lot of reflection. And on that walk that I was talking about in Australia, I was thinking about the girls and their 26 years. And I thought about my own life in 31 years. And I thought I kind of became overwhelmed in this feeling of content where I was like, holy shit, I feel like I've had an incredible life. I've lived in a lot of interesting places for short periods of time. I've traveled to a lot of places. I've met amazing people. I've been fortunate to create something and build it. And I've been able to challenge myself and celebrate and experience love and loss. And I don't know, that feeling was, I don't think I would have had that thought process without prompted. And I think turning 30 last year, and I don't know, there's always like that mark. I feel like that's kind of an age where you start to either take yourself more seriously or take things, maybe people will take you more seriously. I don't know. But I do feel like it's kind of a tipping point. And it was also coming through COVID and the last 3 years of navigating unforeseen challenges. And one thing that I think is really fascinating that came out of the last couple of years is we've had such unprecedented events and things happen where I've been in board meetings and in conversations with other organizations where I have an idea and I raise my hand and everyone's paying attention, where everyone's voice in the room carries the same amount of weight because no one has a set of experiences that could set them up with a better frame of mind or reference point than anybody else in the room. We were all navigating the same set of challenges with zero experience. And I felt like that was a point at which I felt heard and felt really kind of liberated to use my voice and share my thoughts and also gain a lot of confidence in being a leader in an organization where no one knows what they're doing, but someone's got to take the wheel and have confidence and be really thoughtful about where we're going and just stick to it. And that, I think, aged me like a decade in that year or two. But that aside, like, I do feel this wave of, our staff at Skida has been growing. And I think there's 25 people under the age of 30 at my organization. And we have a super young staff. We've had the pleasure of working and employing your daughter, Hazel, a mere high school student. And I adore the fact that young people can come into this company and contribute and have valid opinions and inject some youth and ideas and creativity and a fresh perspective. And I love hearing those ideas and having those seats at the table filled. And I think that's something that is really unique about our organization right now and something that I feel really strongly about maintaining and growing. And yeah, I don't know. I guess that would be where I feel the legacy piece coming in is like, now I feel like we have a lot of young people and I'm really excited about that and honored that anyone would listen to what I have to say because I don't feel like I have any other set of experiences other than what I've lived. I don't have an MBA.
That is a special thing when you've been able to do a project for long enough that next generation starts coming in and I don't want to say carrying it, but like just bringing a lot to it that you may not have considered. And that can only come with time. That can only come with time and experience. And you have you consider your age and how old Skida is. That's pretty rare, right? 14 years old and you're 31. Do the math, people. Impressive. Well, look, I'd love to continue this conversation on the hill. I want to thank you for joining me
let's do that.
today.
Thank you. Thanks for coming into my office digitally.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for listening and subscribing to the Backcountry podcast and for supporting independent media.
This episode was brought to you by Minus 33. Stay comfortable on the slopes for longer with merino wool. Go to minus33.com, that's minus33.com, and use the code Backcountry23 at checkout for 15% off today.
The Backcountry podcast is produced by Backcountry Magazine, an imprint of Height of Land Publications in Jeffersonville, Vermont. Backcountry's small but mighty staff works hard to bring you stories that are beautifully produced, thoughtfully edited, and thoroughly fact-checked. Betsy Monero is our editor-in-chief. Mike Horn is our podcast producer and engineer. Our music was composed by Alex Paul. Please consider supporting independent journalism by subscribing at backcountrymagazine.com. Use code PODCAST for 10% off your entire order. I'm Adam Howard. Thanks for listening. Until next time, we'll see you in the backcountry.